Good morning, everyone. It is 9:01 in Cupertino, so I assume it's also 9:01 here. My name is Kizzia, and I am so happy to be part of this 4-week-long series of prayer offerings designed by our wonderful staff to equip us in this month of October, when anxiety might be running slightly higher than usual. And if you were not here with us the first week, I want to refer you back to the 2 weeks that have gone before this. Thomas led us into the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. So if you did not join us that week, please look back at the St. Francis prayer. I've been using it since Thomas invited us to do that, and it's been really wonderful. And last week, Chase invited us into Howard Thurman's wonderful prayer, Open Unto Me. So those are both available widely online. You can just Google either of those and add those to your prayer tools. And next week, the 4th week in this series, Alfredo will be doing a deep dive into the Book of Common Prayer and helping us to find resources in the Book of Common Prayer, which is also full of wonderful prayers for the resistance of anxiety. So I commend you to those. Today, we are going to be talking about a very well-known prayer, the Serenity Prayer. It is one of the most widely known prayers in English. It comes to memory. Many of us have it memorized, especially if you have learned it in other rooms other than this one, or maybe even in this one at times. But it also translates beyond and across the spectrum and is used widely, not just in 12-step programs, but by many, many Christian traditions. So what I'd like to do is to start by praying together. And I wonder if there's anyone who would like to lead us as we pray the Serenity Prayer. I have a microphone. Would anyone like to lead? I'm sure you would love to do that. Who knows the prayer really well? Catherine. All right, so let's say it with Catherine.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
That's a big order. That's a big order. Anybody else like to read it? Pray it for us? It's wonderful to say it out loud together. Thank you, Anna.
God, give me the strength to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
All right. Anybody else like to read it? Pray it for us? One more time.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Some of us have a hard time not saying, keep coming back at the end of that, but. So notice this is a petition for a lot of difficult things. It is a petition for courage, wisdom, change, and it starts with the petition to God for serenity. So I want to take a moment to reflect on where serenity lives for you. Where is your well of serenity? Where's your source? It's my feeling that God is always present and desiring to give us the answer to our prayers before we even pray them. God is a source of serenity all around us all the time. And we all connect in different ways, in different moments. So take a moment just to reflect in your own life, where are your sources of serenity? And if you want to jot them down, that's fine too, because I'm going to come back to those. Okay. All right, as you continue to sort of reflect on the resources that God has already given you, is there anyone that would like to share your, let's say, your number one primary go-to source for serenity?
My mind, is this on? Yeah. My mind goes to being in nature and moving in nature, like hiking or kayaking, or kind of just moving through a place where there's no technology, there's no, it's just me or me and my people and dogs and nature.
Anyone else want to share?
It used to be that for me. Now it's sitting in nature. I like to get up early in the morning before anybody else in the house and just sit on the deck and watch the sunrise. And usually I can do that for about an hour, and it's very peaceful.
I have a morning ritual where I go get my coffee at Panera. It's kind of like a half a mile walk, so I get to walk before I start work and everything. So I use that time for just kind of reflection, prayer, and I find serenity in that.
I like to, especially early in the morning, get quiet and still for quite some time, because I live in a world that isn't quiet and still generally, and I use that time for peaceful, thoughtful reflection on things, so that throughout the course of the day, those are the things I carry with me so that I don't overreact to things throughout the day.
I agree with everything everyone said, but I also find a lot of serenity in a deep conversation with someone I love.
Thank you.
So believe it or not, I actually have, I feel serenity very strongly when I'm driving by myself in no traffic. So I go down back and forth to San Diego quite a bit, and I know when to go to avoid the traffic super early, that kind of thing. And when I'm on the 5 going by Camp Pendleton and the ocean is on the right and there's really hardly anybody else on the road sometimes, it's just beautiful, and it's such a great opportunity to just be totally present in prayer. And that's kind of my favorite spot.
This may sound odd to somebody, but when I'm in the kitchen baking, there's a wonderful serenity that I experience. And in my apartment complex, it's very quiet early in the morning, and I think I'm the early riser. So that's where I find serenity in my morning meditation, where it's quiet and undisturbed. And sometimes you don't need quiet. You could be driving on the freeway and feel serene as well.
Some of us are fortunate to be the beneficiaries of your baking serenity. So thank you for that. Yes.
Can I speak more than once? Sure. All this talk about driving makes me realize that's the only time I really get to listen to music. We rarely put it on in the house, but we have the radio station on KUSC. This morning my husband said, I have a sense of dread today. But as we were driving along, they were playing Haydn. The wonders of God's world, it displays the firmament. It was just glorious, and I'm taken away from all the troubles and the worries that I normally have.
All right, so as you've shared, we all have these resources already in our hearts and our hands, in our experience. God has already provided them. They're already there for us. They're there to be expanded, to be shared, and most of all, to be a resource for difficulty, right? The Serenity Prayer calls us into some big, big, difficult things, right? And it was originally written, which I will come back to in a bit. It was originally written as a call to action, as a call to social justice. It was an anti-war poem, and it therefore calls us to work, to take charge, to do things. And sometimes that seems impossible. But when we have this deep well of serenity, nothing's impossible. So now I want to take a look at the second stanza here. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Many of us, I will speak for myself first, really resist the idea of acceptance. Acceptance is a real difficult task when one is passionate and inspired and full of faith and hope for the human community, right? So acceptance is hard. But we all have to do it. It's part of being an adult. It's part of being a human. So I want to invite you for a moment to think about places in your life or in our collective lives where you're being asked to accept a difficulty that you would prefer not to accept. So another way of getting at this question is to fill in the blank of this statement. I accept that I cannot change whatever it may be. So let's just meditate on that for a moment. I accept that I cannot change. And what might that be for you? Perhaps I see a lot of very serious, kind of dubious faces. Perhaps it's impossible in this moment to accept that there are things we cannot change, and that's okay. But it's helpful to go through a checklist, at least it is for me. When I start to ask myself the question about what I can and cannot change, and I pull on my well of serenity to try to approach those things, there aren't very many things that I don't feel capable of changing, but there are some. For me, the biggest source of frustration is that I know I cannot change the past. I can reimagine it. I can write it into a short story or a play. I can make a song about it, but I cannot change the past. So that's an example of something that I tend to rail against a bit. There's some tension there. I really wish that I could. There are certain things that I have had to ask God to help me to accept. Things that I cannot change, right? So maybe in this moment, you might want to think about those kind of big things, because most of the other things that are within our grasp, we can change, right? And that's what this prayer is about. What happens though, and this is why this prayer is so effective and deeply resonant with people who are trying to recover their whole health, right? What happens if we can't accept those things which are permanent? What happens then? There's a tension. Regret seeps in, shame seeps in. Things that are not helpful or healthy take over. So acceptance is a really important piece of our spiritual health and mental health. It's just not one that's pleasant, right? It's not easy. So I will ask you to think about that. What are those things that God might be calling you to embrace? Not just even accept, but embrace, that cannot be changed. Anyone have any thoughts about that? Or notes on your note card that you'd like to share?
For me, the biggest thing is always accepting that I cannot change other people's behavior, like my roommate's behavior, my parents' behavior, everyone around me's behavior. So that's always, and that's like an everyday thing. Like, I can't control that. It's no point obsessing over that and stewing, and it only ends up harming me when I get obsessed over other things that other people are doing.
Ooh, I hear that one.
think along the same lines of I can't change other people. And I think for me, I've had to come to terms with what I cannot change in certain people in my life. And then I struggle with, so what is my role in that? If I can't make it better in the way that I had hoped to make it better, and that's, I'm acknowledging my own agenda, and I've come to accept that, then what? Then how, what is my role in relationship with that person or people and the aspects that I cannot change, and how do I reconcile and live with that, and how do I live in relationship with that? That's my struggle. I don't know where anybody else goes with that, but.
Kind of related to what you said, Lori, the struggle of letting go of the losses in my life, whether it's people like my wife who have passed away or people that I love who have moved away or whatever. That's a big struggle for me.
I struggle with the manner in which my mother died. She was assaulted and killed in her nursing home about 6 weeks ago. And I go to this rabbit hole of maybe I had her in the wrong place, maybe I should have visited more, maybe I, and there's no one to blame. She was assaulted by another demented person. But, it's just something I haven't, it's pretty recent, been able to change and won't be.
One more, and then we'll move on to acceptance.
When I'm neurodiverse, and I know if I start fighting with something like my dyscalculia or something, it gets worse. So if I calm myself down and breathe, then what's happening with something that my ADHD or dyscalculia or something, then sometimes if I just stop, then maybe it's not so bad. I know I drive some people crazy with it, but if I think about it, it's hard sometimes.
Thank you. All right, thank you all for sharing. These things that are intractable, it seems, are really difficult to share, so I really appreciate your vulnerability in doing that. This prayer where we're asking God for the serenity to accept these things, some of which you've named and I've named, this is a prayer that is extremely powerful, so I encourage you to continue to try to practice it. That's why I gave you a little card to remind you of it. Some things are so difficult to accept that only God can help us. We just can't do it on our own. So, going back to the prayer itself, we've accepted that we can't change everything and that God can help us to find serenity in that acceptance. But most things, a lot of things that are within our reach, we can change. And that's what this prayer is calling us into. It's a prayer for action. So, the next thing we ask God for here is courage. Because changing big things or even small things, either things that are internal and personal to you, or things that are societal or environmental or cosmic, those things require courage. Changing anything that's significant requires courage. So the Serenity Prayer invites us to assess on a regular basis where we can make change. This is not a passive prayer. It's not a prayer that we can sit and just find peace with and that's all. That's part of it. That's the first part. The second part, and most importantly for us as Christians, part of the Jesus movement, we are called to action every day, whether it be to counter those who despair with hope, as the prayer of St. Francis instructs us, to be instruments of peace, to open unto ourselves that which God would have us do. So we're called to make change internally and in our own circles on a daily basis. And as a Jesus movement, we're asked to try to save the world sometimes. It's a big order, right? So let's think about for a moment, what changes do you feel tugging at you right now? Where's the tension around change in your life, but either personally or politically or societally or spiritually or communally? Where is the tension? Where is God tugging on your cape to try to make you change, to try to bring attention to a change that may be helpful to you and to the world? So take a moment on that one. And again, acknowledging that this prayer is a big order. Some of us will say, I can't go through with that. I can't do that. That's too much for me. Let me just get through my own day, right? But even if that's the way that you are moving in the world right now, even if getting through your own day is your focus, that is a triumph. That is a success. Where are the changes in your own day that you feel called to make? Anyone have thoughts that come immediately to mind that you don't want to edit, you just want to share right off the top of your heart and soul? Changes that you might be wrestling with right now. Yes.
There's always lots of changes that we wrestle with. I have to look at, I have never thought I would not work. I am part of an agency. I've been a caregiver for 20-some years. What has happened now is that my body is telling me something different. My knees are arthritic, so technically I am not in good health to take care of anyone at this point in time, which is a really hard thing for me to travel through, to navigate that, because accepting the possibilities of not working, which is difficult for me. And I have to talk to myself a lot, to tell myself, okay, Anna, this is where you are. Now, what are we gonna do to continue? Because I can still drive, I can still do a lot of things, but caregiving, which has been a real close thing to my heart, I cannot do anymore. And I probably will have to go on disability, which is another thing I've never done in my life. Those thoughts and what I need to do to act on that is what I am feeling now. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. Anyone else? Feeling called to difficult change.
I think especially in this time and day, my thoughts and reactions, especially when it comes to like seeing posts on Facebook and the news and all that, 'cause it's more reactionary and it's not always helpful. And, yeah, then you go down a rabbit hole and you're like always get kind of triggered in a way. And other rising people, like, you know, different thoughts or things that, you know, upset you. So to accept that, need to, you know, change my reaction and my thoughts on that, because I can't change what's going to happen on that, but I can change my reaction and my own thoughts.
Thank you. I feel that one. All right. Any other thoughts that jump to the top of mind?
Even though I left the evangelical church decades ago, I feel like I was born with capes and have had to figure out which ones to leave behind. And so the voices of, you've got to change that, you've got to change that, you've got to fix that, you've got to, you know, solve world hunger, and, you know, the voices from the past are bring everybody to Jesus. And I know that that's not healthy in many ways. And those are it's hard to edit out, and for me, I get paralyzed, because there are things that I am very much moved to change that I feel I do need to, but I get paralyzed with all of the need and all of the stuff out there, and all of those different voices in my head of what I'm supposed to do and how to do it, and so I get stuck. I don't know if anybody relates to that, but that go for anybody else in the room? I don't know. But that's the feeling I have, is it's not hard to know what can change. And yes, I'm empowered to do that. I was empowered to do that as a toddler. But I get just paralyzed with all of the need.
Where to start?
This is interesting as we walk in. It's going to sound selfish, I think. Oh, it's going to sound selfish, I think, but I need to be able to carve out time to regroup every day, and I don't do that. I just feel I'm on a wheel, and if I don't continue, things are going to fall apart, and that's really narcissistic, I think. I don't know what it is. But I need to learn to, if it's just 15 minutes, I don't have to do anything. I can just sit in silence and pet my dogs and just be, instead of thinking I have to do. And I'm a doer, and it's not always healthy. I can't believe I walked in here. Thank you. I'm not shocked.
And where does the Serenity Prayer direct us when we get stuck in this challenge of change? Where do we start? Where does the Serenity Prayer direct us? It directs us to those gifts that the Creator wants to give us in every moment, with every breath. Serenity and courage. Serenity and courage. Letting the priorities come to you through prayer. Letting God's voice be louder than your own confusion or paralysis is our big challenge as humans, yes. So I encourage you, in those moments of feeling stuck, to call up your courage. Turn to people that inspire you for that. Turn to the prayers. Go to Eucharist. Get yourself into community. Gather up strength from other sources, because none of us can do this work in solitude or by ourselves. It's just not possible. It's just not possible. And now the other gift that God gives us, which is way beyond our understanding, is the gift of wisdom. The gift of wisdom to know, hey, I can change that or I can't change that. That's in the past. I need to move here. I need to move there. I need to start somewhere. Where does that wisdom come from? That's a gift from God as well. It's also a gift from trial and error. It's from making mistakes, right? Wisdom comes from kind of putting yourself out on a limb, having the limb break, and falling on your behind. That's where you gain wisdom a lot of times. And God's always there to try to catch us, so it's okay to do that. But wisdom and courage are required for change, right? I want to talk for just 5 minutes and then we're going to stop because I want our colleagues, our worship leaders and tech crew and video crew to be able to get to their stations. But I want to talk for a moment about the origins of this prayer because I think they're very relevant to All Saints Pasadena, to those of us who are social gospel practitioners, to those of us in the Jesus movement. The prayer does not originate from 12-step programs. 12-step programs have made this prayer very popular and well known, which is wonderful. But the prayer originated with a theologian, 20th century theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, who was not an Episcopalian, but certainly hung out with and traveled in circles with Episcopal bishops and clergy in the mid-century, 1910 to when he was a teenager, actually, all the way up through 1970 when he died. He taught at Union Theological Seminary. He was a student graduate at Yale Divinity. He was one of the founding pastors in one of the early evangelical denominations, which became the Lutheran Evangelical Church of America, and also UCC. And Niebuhr first delivered this prayer in a sermon in 1943. And what was going on in 1943 in the United States and around the world? What was going on, right? World War II was at its apex. Niebuhr was an anti-war preacher, an activist. He was a practitioner of social ethics and gospel ethics. And this prayer, as he prayed it in his sermon, which was an anti-war sermon, actually, goes like this. God, give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed. Courage to change the things that should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. So, given that this is a part of a sermon delivered in 1943 from a social justice clergy person working against anti-Semitism, he was working against a fascist uprising in America. He was working against racism. What do you notice about the beginning of this prayer that differs slightly from the way we use it in recovery? So the thing that jumped out at me that Niebuhr was delivering from the pulpit there in Massachusetts in 1943 is that he first petitions God for grace. The first thing that we ask God for here is grace to accept. With serenity, kind of a sidebar, if you will. We'd like to be at peace about acceptance, but maybe we can't be. Maybe in 1943, with the world raging at war, we need grace more than serenity. And I think there's a message there to us today, and that is maybe we can't always accept what God's calling us to from a place of peace and serenity. Maybe we have to pray for grace first in order to get to the serenity, peace, which may or may not ever come. And there are things as many of you referred to, there are things that we may never accept, that we may die wanting to change. We may never accept that we can't change things. But if we have grace first, we may be able to accept that at some point, which is very liberating. It's very liberating to find that acceptance, right? If you have a chance to look up Niebuhr, I highly recommend doing that. He's one of our social justice clergy pioneers of the 20th century, and definitely hung out with crazy, wild Methodist, Lutheran, and Episcopalian bishops, and they were troublemakers, and they're really great examples to us right now. And then finally, I want to close with just a version of the Serenity Prayer that I learned working in recovery. And I learned this from other people, other therapists and counselors who just struggled to accept that there was anything that couldn't change, because we're working with people who are so wounded and so in need of healing. And this is the version of the prayer that we would say together in our outpatient program and in our residential programs for people that were really wounded and struggling. God grant us the courage to change the things we cannot accept. And that kind of lands with me a little bit. Because again, I think a lot of us that are in the resistance, a lot of us that practice resistance to big forces all the time, we don't like to talk about or think about or accept that there's anything that can't change. So if that is where you land on the spectrum of change, this is what I would offer you. God grant us the courage to change the things we cannot accept. I want to stop there so that we can get to church, which is the biggest source, right, for all of us in terms of serenity and courage and wisdom. And I want to thank you for being here this morning. If you'd like to see a couple of resources here that I used when I got very excited to start researching Reinhold Niebuhr, for example, which took me down a track. I could tell you a lot about him, but we don't have time. But please check that out. Also, there's the 12 and 12. If you want to take a picture of these so you can look for them at the library, please do that. And if you didn't get a prayer card, there's a few prayer cards here. Please come back next Sunday and be with Alfredo, and let's jump into the Book of Common Prayer together and pull those resources into the prayer toolkit. And thank you all again.